Let's talk about the game. Let's talk about the Ravens. The Ravens are incredible, Mike. And guess what? I want to start here and get in front of something. I famously said I was wondering if the Ravens were frauds in September when they were 2-2. Remember, back in September, this Ravens team got smoked by the Browns and got run all over in Baltimore, 2-2. They have not lost since that moment. They're on a franchise record 10-game winning streak now. Mike, the fact that the Ravens, I think last night they punted 4 times. That was the second time all year that they punted more than 3 times in a game. They basically made the punting position obsolete by being an unbelievable offense and going for it on 4th down and being aggressive. This reminds me, Mike, of watching a superior versus inferior college football game when the Ravens play some of these opponents. Like last night, the spread was 17. And it wasn't crazy to take the Ravens, which is almost unheard of in the NFL. And that's how good they are, and that's how much they're rolling.
Yeah, I've said all year that for whatever reason, NFL bettors can't get comfortable with the idea of 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-point spreads. And there are a lot of these games where I think the spread isn't as big as it should be, that the gap is much bigger than the average bettor will acknowledge an NFL game would ever have that kind of gap. But we have seen it time and again this year, and we saw it last night, the 21-point victory, the cover. Although the Jets had a chance, had a chance to get enough points to get within the margin. They ultimately didn't pull it off. And, you know, the other thing about the Ravens, and this is why I believe next year they will be on prime time the maximum number of times allowable by league rules. And when they're not in prime time games, they're going to be 4:25 p.m. Eastern on CBS or Fox. I think that Lamar Jackson has the gift of getting people to keep watching even after the game is no longer worth watching. You want to watch and see what Lamar Jackson is going to do next.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And a little bonus, you get the nostalgic run of RG3 when Lamar Jackson, when they get to the 40-point mark, and they're like, all right, we're going to take Lamar Jackson out. Last night, RG3 comes in, and everyone's watching because, you know, there's RG3 had his moment in time that I think everyone looks back on somewhat fondly, unless you're maybe a Redskins fan or a member of the Shanahan family. But this was, I mean, it is must-watch TV when the Ravens are playing. And the way they score with ease, it really does look like they shouldn't be on the same field. So much so, Mike, I don't know if you saw last night, but Lamar Jackson, it was like a card signing at center field at the 50-yard line after the game. Lamar Jackson was signing like every single jersey for the Jets. Everyone was lined up. They wanted to get a piece of Lamar Jackson. He's that type of transcendent talent. I posed this question on my podcast, Mike. Is this, pardon my take, little shout out, Adam Sandler and Kevin Garnett today. Is this the easiest choice Madden has ever had for a video game cover? Lamar Jackson on next year's Madden?
It's a no-brainer. It's absolutely a no-brainer. It's the easiest for that. It's the easiest MVP choice we've ever had. I said last night, anybody who doesn't vote for Lamar Jackson should have their vote stripped of them. And, you know, you may as well get a piece of Lamar Jackson after the game because you're not going to get it during the game. We were showing highlights of the game there, and a point that we made on the little TV stub on the way in, he's learning how to run out of bounds. We had 2 consecutive plays in that packet where he runs out of bounds. And that is smart, and that is wise, and that is mature, and that is what Lamar Jackson needs to do. Aaron Rodgers told him that when they played in the preseason. Get down, slide, get out of bounds. That's the way you are able to keep doing all those great things you do. Now, he did take a big pop right there on the record-setting run when he passed Mike Vick for the most yards by a quarterback rushing in any season, but multiple occasions last night, he chose to get out of bounds. And I think that once he works that in on a regular basis, you take away that element of, well, it's just a matter of time until he gets injured. No, it's not. And here we are 14 games in, and what many thought would have been inevitable back in September has not happened yet, and I think that makes the Ravens even more dangerous going into the playoffs.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right on the MVP thing, because when I think of MVPs, I always want, people have different definitions of MVP. Usually it's going to be a guy from one of the best teams, but you could make the argument that there are some middle-of-the-pack teams where there's one guy who significantly deserves more credit for that team's success. But my definition of MVP every single year is I want to look back and say, what was that year about? What was that year? What was the memorable thing from that year? Patrick Mahomes last year was significant. He was the memorable thing. You think of the 2018 NFL season, you think of Patrick Mahomes. The same goes for Lamar Jackson this year. He is the story this year. It's really other than it's basically the 49ers and Lamar Jackson are kind of the two dueling stories for the 2019 season of what was the thing that was most memorable. Obviously, there's the playoffs to write a bunch of chapters here, but in terms of regular season, those are the two stories, and Lamar Jackson is the singular story in himself.
And Lamar Jackson has been very humble throughout his NFL career. He doesn't care about individual achievement, individual records, doesn't care about MVP. He just wants to win the Super Bowl. But last night, he was very happy to break the single-season rushing record for a quarterback that had been held by Mike Vick since 2006 with 1,039 yards. Lamar Jackson sailed past it last night. After the game, he was asked about what it meant to him to break Vick's record. Here he is.
It's pretty cool. My favorite player growing up, but it's amazing, and I'm going to cherish that forever. And we just got to keep it going. Right? Records meant to be broken, like he said. I heard him say that, and it's an honor for me to do it.
Yeah, and, here's the thing about Vic, and people have been comparing Jackson to Vic. Jackson is better than Vic ever was. The year that Vic had 1,039 yards rushing, he wasn't an MVP candidate. If you go back and look at his game-by-game stats that year, he was so wildly inconsistent. That was the year that he flipped off the fans at the Georgia Dome after a late season game because they were booing him. They were upset with the fact that the Falcons lost. It was not a good year for the Falcons that season. Yes, he got 1,039 yards, but that's the only thing that was worth talking about. Lamar Jackson is the complete package. He can run, he can throw, his team is good around him, and they're making the most out of his skills and abilities. The offense has been designed specifically for him. And remember that narrative last year, Big Cat, that when teams get a second shot at Lamar Jackson, it's all going to be dramatically different. Now, only one team's gotten a second shot at him this year, the Bengals. Not that that matters. The Browns get their second shot next week, and they beat him in week 4 somehow. But no one's talking about that. Well, the second time through, it'll be a lot different. No, it's not going to be any different because nobody can come up with a way to stop this guy because physically the other players don't have the abilities to get close to him.
Well, now let's pump the brakes here for a second because Mike Florio, would you say that you'd be shocked if we are sitting here in the middle of January and it's a Friday or it's a Monday and the New England Patriots have beaten the Baltimore Ravens in the playoffs because Bill Belichick, who has taken down some of the best offensive minds in the game, figured out a way to stop Lamar Jackson? I mean, I agree with you that it is nearly impossible to stop Lamar Jackson at this point. But if there's one guy, we said the same thing when the Greatest Show on Turf looked like they were going to score 1 billion points in that Super Bowl. There's one guy who could probably figure out a way, his second shot at him. It's the guy in New England who's won 6 rings. He's got 6 rings on his hands. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that he has the offense to complement whatever we come up with defensively. And I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back 11 years before the Greatest Show on Turf. He's the guy that came up with the game plan that took down the K-Gun offense.
Yes.
Super Bowl 25.
So this is right. So I agree with you that the Patriots offense has been abysmal and there are big issues, and I don't know if they'll be able to pull the weight. But in terms of a team out there that they might have to face for the second time, the New England Patriots are sitting there. And it's definitely different when you go up against Bill Belichick the second time in a year. So I wouldn't put the Ravens strictly. I wouldn't throw them into the Super Bowl just yet. Although they clearly are the best team, the most consistent team in the AFC, and that's been the case for 2.5 months now. And no one's even come close to touching them.
And let me put this out there because it's an interesting dilemma the Ravens are going to face potentially in Week 17 if they lock up the number 1 seed. There was a report yesterday from Mike Garafolo of NFL Media that they're considering sitting Lamar Jackson Week 17 against the Steelers. And I don't like that because if the Steelers need to win that game to get in, and maybe by then they won't, so it won't matter, I think the Ravens need to do everything they can to knock the Steelers out because before you would have that return date with the Patriots in the AFC Championship game, there's a possibility that the Steelers come rolling into Baltimore, and that's the last team I think the Ravens want to see at any point in the playoffs because they don't care about Lamar Jackson. They're not intimidated by anybody. They almost beat the Ravens earlier in the year, a game that went to overtime, the game where Mason Rudolph got knocked out on his feet, and maybe they'll beat him week 17 if he ends up playing in the game. I don't want to see the Steelers because I think Mike Tomlin could come up with something, not necessarily the game plan, but getting his guys into a mindset where just by sheer force of will and physicality, they find a way to outscore the Ravens. So I don't want to mess with them either, and I'm going to knock them out if I can if I'm the Ravens.
I don't know. I think you would not want to take your chances against one of the best, if not the best, defenses in the NFL right now, the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think I would probably sit Lamar Jackson if you got nothing to play for. Just let the chips fall where they may after that and make sure you're healthy going into January.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.